The savanna stretched endlessly beneath a burning afternoon sun, its golden grasses swaying gently in the dry breeze. Heat shimmered above the dusty ground, bending the horizon into a wavering mirage. The man moved slowly, boots crunching against the brittle earth, his eyes scanning the landscape with the steady focus of someone used to its unforgiving rhythm. He had been walking for hours, searching, observing, documenting, but what he saw next stopped him in his tracks. Lying beneath the thin shade of a lone acacia tree was a lion. Not the fierce, powerful image etched into storybooks, but a ghostly shadow of one. Its body was frighteningly thin, ribs cutting sharp lines against its skin, shoulders sunken, mane unkempt and dull. The once proud muscles of the predator had wasted away, leaving behind a fragile frame that seemed too weak to belong to the king of beasts. The lion lifted its head with effort, its amber eyes locking onto the man. There was no roar, no warning growl, only a deep, hollow silence that carried more weight than any sound could. Those eyes told a story of hunger, of days without a successful hunt, of nights spent pacing with an empty belly under the cold stars. The man froze, his breath caught halfway in his chest. Every instinct told him to step back, to respect the deadly potential of the animal before him, no matter how weakened it looked. Yet something in those eyes kept him rooted. It wasn't the gaze of a predator ready to strike. It was the gaze of a creature on the edge, caught between survival and surrender. His heart pounded, torn between fear and compassion. For the first time, he saw not a lion, not a wild beast, but a fellow being, worn, desperate, fragile. The savanna around them seemed to hold its breath, as if the entire world was waiting to see what would happen next. And in that suspended moment, a silent bond began to form. The man's hand trembled slightly as he reached into the small canvas satchel slung over his shoulder. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a piece of raw meat he had brought, part of his supplies for emergencies. His fingers brushed against it, cold and slick, and for a moment he hesitated. Feeding a wild lion was unthinkable, dangerous, foolish, even, but as his eyes lifted again to the skeletal figure before him, hesitation melted into determination. He pulled out the meat slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. The scent of blood carried on the dry air almost instantly, and the lion's nostrils flared. Its head rose higher, though with visible effort, and its golden eyes sharpened with a flicker of life. Hunger had awoken something inside. The man dropped to one knee, lowering himself to appear less threatening. His heartbeat echoed in his ears like a drum, but his face remained calm. Holding the meat in an open palm, he extended his hand toward the lion, the offering suspended between fear and faith. For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. The lion's gaze darted between the man's face and the raw flesh, uncertainty written in the twitch of its whiskers and the cautious lift of its paw. Every inch forward was measured, deliberate, as though it too was weighing the risk. Dust swirled around them in the wind, the savanna eerily quiet, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The man whispered softly under his breath, words meant not for understanding, but for comfort. A gentle rhythm of sound to ease the fragile trust forming between them. At last, the lion's muzzle brushed the man's hand. Its rough tongue grazed his skin as it took the meat, fangs dangerously close to his fingers. For a heartbeat, the man froze, instinct screaming at him to recoil. But he held steady. The lion began to chew weakly, eyes never leaving the man's. In that delicate exchange, predator and human became something else entirely, two survivors sharing a fragile moment of trust. The lion chewed slowly, each bite a struggle between hunger and exhaustion. The man kept his hand steady, fingers still resting near the animal's muzzle, though his pulse thundered in his veins. Every instinct screamed to pull back, to retreat to safety, yet he forced himself to remain calm. His breathing grew deliberate, steadying the tremor in his chest. This was no longer about fear, it was about trust. The lion's eyes, deep and gold, flicked upward. For a moment, they met the man's gaze directly. It wasn't the glare of dominance, nor the sharp watchfulness of a predator about to strike. Instead, there was something quieter, something fragile, recognition. The man felt it wash over him like a silent wave. He began to whisper again, his voice low, soothing, carried away on the warm breeze. The words were meaningless, perhaps, but the tone was steady, reassuring. The lion tilted its head slightly, as if listening, not to the words, but to the cadence, the rhythm of calm reassurance that cut through the vast silence of the savanna. Dust lifted and swirled between them. A bird cried faintly in the distance, but even that sound faded quickly, swallowed by the strange stillness that hung in the air. It was as if the world itself had paused to bear witness. The lion lowered its head again, resting its heavy muzzle briefly against the man's hand. The contact was fleeting, but it was enough. The man felt the roughness of its mane against his wrist, the warmth of its breath on his skin. A connection, raw, unspoken, had been made. He looked at the lion, not as a beast to be feared, nor as a symbol of wild majesty, but as another soul suspended between life and death, courage and despair. In its weakness, he saw his own vulnerability mirrored back at him. And in that silence, predator and human understood one another, not through words, but through something far older, far deeper. A silent pact of survival. As the lion chewed the last of the meat, the man found himself staring, almost unable to look away. His eyes traced the sharp ridges of the animal's ribs, the sunken hollows where powerful muscles once rippled, the dull mane that no longer framed a creature of majesty but one of survival. And yet, in that frail body, he could still imagine the lion it had been. In his mind, he saw it standing tall upon a rocky outcrop, mane blazing in the golden light of dawn. He could almost hear the thunder of its roar rolling across the plains, a sound that once silenced the air and announced dominance over all it surveyed. He pictured the pride behind it, lionesses moving with grace, cubs tumbling through the tall grass, all of them looking to this great beast for protection and leadership. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, replaced by the frailty before him. The contrast struck him hard, pulling at something deep inside. This lion was not simply a starving animal, it was a king fallen from its throne, stripped of the dignity that once commanded the wild. The man's throat tightened. He had seen many creatures in the savanna, gazelles fleeing across open fields, elephants marching with quiet authority, predators circling their prey. But none had moved him like this. This was not just nature's cycle at work. This was tragedy. Kneeling closer, he whispered softly again, his voice breaking slightly. "You were strong once, you can be strong again." The words spilled out before he could stop them, as if speaking them aloud might anchor the lion's fading spirit to the memory of its former self. The lion lifted its head faintly, its eyes reflecting the setting sun. For an instant, the man swore he saw it, not the broken creature, but the king it once had been. Proud, fearless, eternal. That vision, fragile yet undeniable, filled him with resolve. He knew then. This was not just an encounter. It was a responsibility. The lion finished the last scraps of meat, licking its muzzle with slow, deliberate strokes. Its breathing was steadier now, though still shallow, its chest rising and falling in a fragile rhythm. The man stayed kneeling, hands resting loosely on his thighs, his body tense but unmoving. He did not dare to break the fragile trust that had settled between them. For a moment, the lion simply stared at him, its amber eyes searching, unreadable. The man held its gaze, calm and unwavering, even though his heart thundered like a war drum inside his chest. Then, with a movement so unexpected it nearly stole his breath, the lion leaned forward. Its mane, tangled and coarse, brushed against his forearm. The touch was not forceful, not aggressive, it was tentative, almost gentle. The man inhaled sharply, every muscle in his body bracing for danger, but none came. Instead, the great beast lowered its head, letting the heavy weight of its muzzle rest briefly against his arm. It was a gesture not of dominance, but of something closer to gratitude. Slowly, cautiously, the man lifted a hand. His fingers hovered above the lion's mane, trembling. He hesitated. One wrong move could shatter everything, but then, with the courage of someone who understood the moment's sacredness, he let his hand sink into the coarse fur. The mane was rough, matted with dust and age, but beneath it he felt warmth. Life. The lion did not pull away. Instead, it closed its eyes for a fleeting instant, as though allowing itself to remember what it meant to be safe. The man's throat tightened with emotion. He had touched wild creatures before. Birds, antelope, even elephants, but never like this. This was no simple contact. This was communion. Two beings, worlds apart, meeting in a moment of shared vulnerability. He whispered softly, barely audible over the wind. "You're not alone." And for the first time, it felt true. The sun dipped lower across the horizon, painting the vast savanna in hues of amber and crimson. Long shadows stretched across the grasslands, and the heat of the day gave way to a gentle, cooling breeze. The man remained kneeling, his hand still resting near the lion, reluctant to break the fragile bond that had formed. The lion stirred, shifting its weight onto trembling legs. At first, it seemed it might collapse again, its body swaying unsteadily. But then, with a quiet groan of effort, it pushed itself upright. Dust lifted from its mane as it rose, catching the last rays of the sun in a fleeting glow. It was not the full, commanding silhouette of a king. It was frail, weakened, but in that moment, it carried a dignity that even starvation could not erase. The man's eyes followed every movement, his breath caught in his throat. He had expected only to ease its hunger, to offer a chance at one more day of survival. But what he saw now was something greater. A spark, a flicker of strength returning where there had been only despair. The lion turned its head, amber eyes locking onto his once more. No growl, no warning, just a silent recognition. The man swallowed hard, his chest tightening with a mix of awe and sorrow. The words slipped from him like a prayer, carried on the evening wind. "You are still the king." The lion blinked slowly, as though acknowledging the truth in those words. Then, with deliberate steps, it began to move away, its tail swaying low, paws pressing into the earth with newfound steadiness. Each step seemed to carry it further from weakness and closer to the echo of what it once had been. The man stayed kneeling, watching until the lion's form became a fading silhouette against the horizon. He knew their paths might never cross again. Yet he also knew that, for one fleeting moment, he had restored more than just a life, he had restored dignity. And as darkness settled over the savanna, hope lingered in the wild.